The theme of this panel is the power of collaboration. So we will talk about collaboration cross sectors, cross disciplines, take the larger perspectives, but also come down to the very questions about well-functioning teams, which you touched upon a bit in the previous panel. Because of the challenges that humanity faces today, I think we're all quite convinced that not a single one will be solved through a solo run. We will need collaboration. We always have needed it, and it will be one of the most important factors for us to actually be able to work towards the future that we like. So I'll start by introducing this lovely panel that we have on stage by addressing each one of you. And I'll start with you, David. And to introduce you, I'd like to move over to Stockholm, Sweden for a second, because what happens in December each year when the Nobel Prize laureates come to Stockholm to receive their prize is that they also visit the Nobel Prize Museum, and very often, if we're lucky, donate objects to us. And these objects is part of our collection. We exhibit them because they carry the stories of the Nobel Prize laureates. These can be personal objects or objects that have been a tool in somebody's work, and we think that they are like little portals into outer space, or into our bodies, or to other places of the world, or other times. And the object, one of the objects, because you donated 3 objects to us, David, one of them are currently at display in our permanent exhibition, and I think it tells a really beautiful story about a good team. And as Brito just mentioned in the previous talk, a good team is where you feel safe. So, David, can you tell us, who is NABO?
So, who is NABO? So NABO, if you visit the Nobel Museum in Stockholm, you'll see one of the things I donated is it's basically a gas cylinder cap with a face painted on it, and it's very, very ugly. It's the ugliest thing you have ever seen. And the reason I donated it was because in my group, we sort of have this idea that we take our science seriously, but we don't take ourselves too seriously. We want to have fun. We want to enjoy ourselves. And one way that my group does this is over 20 years, when my group would take a photograph of me in it, and I'd be looking very serious, they would sneak in this ugly head thing at the last moment. And every time I'd show a photograph, it would show up in my talk with this ugly face in it, which always made me really upset. It drove me crazy. And even when I gave my Nobel lecture, they snuck in Nobel and this ugly face into my Nobel lecture. So at the end of the day, I donated it to the Nobel Museum because, number one, it was my best way of getting rid of it, to make sure it would never show up again. But number two, it was a reflection of my group. And, you know, I won the Nobel Prize, but it was my group that won the Nobel Prize, and it was all the work that they did, and it was the spirit and the way that we interacted with each other, and the fun that we had interacting over all those years, and the comfort to be able to do things like that is one of the things I'm most proud of, actually. So thank you, Erika, for giving me the chance to talk about that.
You should be proud. No, it tells us a really beautiful story about, the importance of a sense of humor. Because it helps. I suppose that the team's been very successful, but a sense of humor helps in when you have setbacks as well. I would assume.
Yeah.
Thank you. And from there, I'd like to turn to you, Anderson. And I'd like to point to something that I think has been very specific to the last few years in your work, which was during the pandemic, when your skill set came to be really, really useful. You've been working, you're a virologist, been working with understanding infectious disease, how it spreads and how it emerges, and when the pandemic hit, you went from a normal research situation, work situation, to a situation where you were a lot in the media. You started communicating and interacting with the general public in an entirely new way, I imagine. And you gave more than 100 interviews, became one of the most consulted specialists in Brazil during the pandemic. And you also started using your social media very much to both get the information out there, but also combat misinformation. So, can you say something about how did this change your view on the importance of communication, interacting with the public in scientific work?
Yeah, definitely. I started this, let's say, endeavor like prior to the first cases of the COVID-19 started to spread outside China. So it was actually in January 2020 when I gathered together with other researchers from Latin America to basically translate any good information that we could find about COVID, which at that time was called nCoV-19. So it has a very weird name, like novel coronavirus. And at that point, we decided to join forces. So it was a very collaborative work. It involved a medical doctor, an epidemiologist, another virologist, a molecular biologist, to learn all the basics about this new disease that was starting to spread all over the place, and to somehow try to move faster with this information, because we knew that at some point misinformation would run even faster, and we would have to be able to somehow help tackle that, even though this is almost impossible. But because of this initial work that I started to do, as you said, on social media, I realized that I started to be contacted by the traditional media to explain that specific concept. For example, variants. What are variants? Now we have a new variant. What is that? And this question was coming up all the time because it was basically a permanent doubt from the public. Then came vaccines, also lots of doubts about that, and fake news also running around, making our task really, really difficult. But at some point I realized, even though that was a job that I was doing that was taking a lot of my time because I had to stop my research to do science communication, at some point I realized that was something that I needed to do, because I was somehow in the front line of data analysis. So I had information that could ease the anxiety of some people, especially in Brazil. And since then, I have been doing that. Right now, I have not been doing that a lot because, luckily, the situation are now more under control. But as soon as we are facing new threats, I am really happy to jump in again.
So you really put your own research to side for a bit there and focused on communication and since then you've been balancing back and forth. That's really interesting. Also considered what you just said in your talk before, that scientists are really measured or assessed from a lot of things, but not really from science communication. So it's really a great responsibility of yours to take, I think. Antonio, your practice is entirely defined by collaboration. You're leading a research team where you have very different fields of knowledge and design and execution of applied research represented, and you work for a lot of applied research projects for the industry. And I think it's interesting how you're also reflected about something that we think about a lot in our system, which is the combination of categories within the Nobel Prize, how we, how the wholeness of these categories is really more than their parts, I think. So could you say something about how you reflected on the intersectionality of these categories?
Yes, thank you, Erika. As a social species, we need to collaborate. Maybe it's quite easy for the bees, but should be for us also. And we need to collaborate. As Anderson said, it's not a so easy task, and the fake news is a negative way to collaboration, information with negative aspects. And when we face to a recent challenge like climate change or even pandemic, we need collaborate. We need diversity. We need people with different backgrounds, different scientific formation. If no, we can't reach solution, in my case, for the industrial, for innovation, and we need collaborate.
Thank you. And I mean, the aspect of communication is really an important part, I think, of communication. The aspect of communication is really important part of collaboration. I mean, collaboration is to an extent communication, I think. So I'd like to just linger for a moment on this communication aspect that you spoke a lot about, Anderson. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from you, David, because you went from in a situation where you were you suddenly communicated a lot more with the public and interacting a lot more. And I would assume, David, that something similar happened to you when you became a Nobel Prize laureate. All of a sudden, you know, everyone wants you on panels like this. They want to interview you and all kinds of things. What has your experience been of all of us of that kind of change?
Yeah, it's incredible. I remember the day before I won the Nobel Prize, I tried to have a Zoom call with some friends, and no one wanted to Zoom. No one was interested. And the next morning, I had to talk to the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and the BBC, and I'd never had any media training whatsoever. And it's just the most remarkable moment when you have to suddenly start trying to think about the way that the people want to hear what you're saying. So the communication part is really important. But for the collaboration part, the one other part I would point to and why collaboration is important is one where I think this is important for Brazil, it's important for the US, it's important for Europe, but science and industry and academia and industry has to collaborate. But sometimes the communication of being able to know, for example, working on fundamental science while still having an impact on industry, there are ways to do it, but it's almost impossible to do that without talking to people on the other side of that fence. And I think that's something, in talking to people in Brazil, would be incredibly important to increase that dialogue between academia and industry. It's very, very important in other places, but it's still not enough. And I think it's one of the greatest opportunities for societies to increase that collaboration between these two very important entities.
Yeah, and I think that's right, and I think that's really in focus of all of us today's theme, something that we should really take away from the entire day. And I'd like to just have you speak shortly about, because I think you can learn a lot about what a good collaboration is and what makes it work well if you address the times that it hasn't worked well, the bad collaboration. Anderson, have you had an experience ever of a bad collaboration that didn't at all turn out the way you would have wished?
Yeah, definitely. During the pandemic, I had to join many consortiums that were promising to do very impactful work with very regular outcomes. Like every 2 months, we would supposedly have a paper coming out with new discoveries about COVID. But what ended up happening was I stayed in such collaboration which was not very well coordinated. It was also a project with not very clear objectives, scopes, which made my life really, really terrible for more than 2 years. So I had to dedicate time to such projects. At the beginning, I thought, well, I would get lots of nature and science papers out of it. In the end, I could say I got nothing out of that, mostly frustration, because I was expecting something big to come up, and nothing happened. So, to some extent, I think that was due to poor leadership as well, because we had many leaders, and there were no single one that was the head, kind of overlooking everything. So we had many people giving orders, but with no coordination. I also see very poor allocation of, let's say, talents to specific tasks. It was a little bit scrambled. And I think these aspects that I mentioned was what defined the not so successful outcome of this specific project.
That is super interesting. We've heard earlier today that being a scientist is being an adventurer without a boss. But what I hear you saying is that a framework can be useful to really foster a successful collaboration, that can really be necessary for it to be well-functioning. Interesting. Antonio, do you have an experience of bad collaboration?
Collaborate, it's a hard task. It's, I use a word of you, David, when you said about the collaboration between academy and industry, and I would like to add a society in this third pillar, but with considering a power of the market that is a society. And is a kind of unconscious collaboration between industry, academy, and the market, our society. And the sustainability issues and our future depends of our society and our market. It's a conscious, educated, well-educated market. It's a very interesting point of view, and we need to reflect these three pillars: market, industry, and academia.
Yeah, it can come in the way of good collaboration otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. What about you, David? Any experience of bad collaboration?
It was funny, Erika told us these questions just before we walked out on the stage, and I was thinking about bad collaborations, and I've had bad collaborations, but I realized in all cases the problem was usually me. It was the problem. I'm not the world's best collaborator, I have to say, and it's because it's usually the trickiest part in a collaboration, I find, is matching the styles of the people who are collaborating. If one person wants to send you 15 emails a day and the other person only wants to respond once a week, that's usually me. That's not usually going to work. And I've found actually the best collaborations happen when you really get to know the people you're collaborating with really well, like personally as friends almost, because you start to understand where they're coming from and how they think and how they operate. And if you can do that, I've had some amazing collaborations with some of my closest friends, even though scientifically we're at the opposite ends of the spectrum. But because we're friends, we can have a beer, we can have conversations, and we all know in science that's often where some great ideas come from, is sitting around just socializing and talking to each other. It really is that important.
That's beautiful, and I really think it speaks to what we've touched upon before, that psychological safety really has been proven to lead to fruitful collaborations, and I think that's an important aspect. So we should end on a good note. So I'd like to ask you as well, Anderson, any examples of a really good collaboration, and what do you think made it work so well? David pointed to a couple of things here.
Yeah, definitely. I guess over the past years, especially during the pandemic, the projects that I felt that I was really productive were those that started with a plan, a very effective plan. Like, we want to answer this couple of questions here. We are going to use these methods. And some of those methods were not within the realm of the disciplines that were under the domain of my group. So we had to contact collaborators, which were also good friends. I think that made the work so much easier, because I had to concentrate only on aspects that I really know. And the other aspects that were really interesting, but I had no idea about them, I left them to be done by people that are really good, not me. The project leader was the one that selected these other collaborators. And then in the end, in a matter of a few months, we had a very impactful paper coming out, It was super easy for me. It was super easy for the other collaborators. And then we finished the work within that timeline that was set during the planning of the project. So science has this aspect about improvisation, which is amazing, but I guess we should not improvise in every step of the science project. Improvisation has its space, but it should not be all over the place, right?
A clear common goal makes it more likely to reach that point. Thank you. And finally, you, Antonio, any examples you'd like to share with us?
I agree that communication is essential for the collaboration, but the general commitment is also special, because all the team and all the people involved are big commitment, and we have the common objectives for this project or the tasks. I believe that the commitment of all people involved is very important to collaborate, to a very good example of collaboration.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I think we are ready to take away from this panel that collaboration is key. It's key to everything. And you have to have an open mind and accept that people with completely different skill sets than your own can really contribute to where you're going. And that sometimes it requires clear boundaries. Clear boundaries help. But what definitely helps is always a good sense of humor. Thank you very much for this lovely talk.